Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Morris, the Community Engagement Manager at HERC.
And I'm Sam Goldberg, HERC's Director of Education.
And today we're bringing you the first installment of HERC's Community Learning Lab. This is a monthly series that investigates Holocaust history at different angles. And oftentimes we're trying to make these timely. So with the upcoming release of the PBS documentary, The U.S. and the Holocaust, we decided to focus on America and the Holocaust. And so our question today is going to focus on what barriers were there for Jews in Europe to come to the United States during the Holocaust. And so before we talk about the years between 1933 and 1945, we'd like to give you a little bit of background information. After World War I, there was a very strong sentiment of isolationism in the United States. And in the 1920s, legislation was passed that significantly restricted immigration, that quotas were established for every country in Europe, and particularly countries where Jews were in high numbers, particularly in Eastern Europe. Those quotas were very, very low. So it was very, very difficult starting in the 1920s for Jews, particularly Jews in Eastern Europe, to immigrate to the United States. And this was reflective of the anti-immigrant, anti-Semitic feelings that were very present in many parts of US society, including in the government. And of course, these anti-immigration and anti-Semitic sentiments only get worse in October 1929 when the stock market crashes.
What was the United States immigration policy during the Holocaust?
As Michael just mentioned, the quota system was established in 1924, was still the policy as Hitler became chancellor in 1933. And between this time, the Great Depression had also riddled the United States, and with high unemployment and everything that went along with that, really admitting more people was a widely unpopular opinion.
How long did it usually take for Jews to immigrate from Europe to the United States?
There was a very lengthy process for people to go through in an increasingly hostile environment. Those looking for refuge needed to gather numerous documents, such as a full police report, a medical history, tax forms. In addition, people needed to have an American financial sponsor that would take responsibility for you upon your arrival so that you would not be a burden to the government. And there was not texting and cell phones and emails, so you couldn't just communicate back and forth with your contacts in the United States. Mail, letter, they were slow, and by the time that you received letters, you may have been moved from your home and not have been able to continue that correspondence that you had started. So again, this was an incredibly difficult process. And on top of all of this, you had to have already purchased a ship ticket, which was incredibly expensive today, up to thousands of dollars, before knowing whether or not you'd actually be allowed on that ship. But miraculously, people were able to get all of this together in a desperate attempt to find safe refuge.
Did the general immigration percentage to the United States increase or decrease during the Holocaust?
Did these percentages actually increase or decrease? These immigration percentages to let people in? The quota that Michael mentioned in the beginning was never adjusted to allow more refugees, and it was actually rarely filled. As you can see from the graphic on the screen, this was taken from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's exhibit, Americans in the Holocaust. Highly recommend if you haven't taken a look at it. It shows that between 1933 and 1945, only 1 year did they actually fill the number of quotas that they had allowed. Otherwise, there was just a very lengthy waiting list, and people were waiting to get in, but we did not admit as many as we could have.
Were the Jews accepted by the government when they were fleeing Europe?
How many did you say people actually got in between 1933 and 1945?
So it's believed somewhere between 180,000 and 220,000 European Jews were able to come to the United States. But considering, as Sam mentioned, how the quotas were rarely filled, it opens up the question of how many more people could have been brought in, and that's just under the quota system.
Yeah,
that was deliberately set very low.
We also had the Avion Conference, where 32 delegates from different countries got together to discuss this refugee problem that they were all seeing and experiencing firsthand. And while all expressed sympathy for what was happening to the Jewish people and the reign of terror that was coming from Germany, all but one country said, "I'm sorry, we cannot take in any more refugees," including the United States, including Great Britain. The Dominican Republic was really the only country that said they would take in refugees, and even that was kind of minimal. So just looking at that as kind of like an international failure, a missed opportunity that even the German government, in response to Evian, somewhat enthusiastically shared the irony that they were that foreign countries were so readily critical of the German government and their treatment of Jews, but none of them would open the doors when the opportunity arose.
This brings us to the post-war period. So after Nazi Germany is defeated in May 1945, what did the survivors do? Where did they go? And as many of you can imagine, most of the survivors did not want to return to their homes and oftentimes could not return to their homes. That included reasons because their hometown was destroyed during the war, and also just because the Holocaust ended, it didn't mean that anti-Semitism had ended, that there was still, in some cases, violent hostility towards Jews. So many Holocaust survivors go to displaced persons camps that were set up by the victorious Allies that were located in Germany, Austria, and Italy. So by mid-1947, there were about 250,000 Jewish displaced persons. And during this time period, the quotas established by the United States were still in place. So many of these Jewish displaced persons could not get out of Europe and come to the United States at that moment. So what changes is in 1950 during the Displaced Persons Act, which by 1952 enabled about 80,000 Jewish displaced persons to come to the United States. Most went to New York City, but New York City was not the only place survivors arrived. Some arrived in Milwaukee as well, and the majority of those survivors settled on the west side of the city. And then one question that comes is, why the United States? So there are a number of reasons for that. For one, there was a precedent of Jewish immigration before the quotas of the 1920s. There were large waves of Jewish immigration to the United States. Most of the displaced persons camps were in the American zone in Germany. They were overseen by Americans. And also, leaving Europe gave survivors an opportunity to start over. And the final piece I'll add to that is the fact that there were many Jewish American agencies who were very active, like the Joint Distribution Committee, in the displaced persons camps. So these are all reasons that explain why the United States became a point of destination for so many survivors.
Thank you. And so that kind of concludes this conversation, but if you enjoyed the format of this, or if you'd like to submit a question or a theme for an upcoming series, feel free to reach out to HERC. You can do so on our website or call the office and submit your questions there.
Thank you so much.